Wow. Vinny really wasn't playing games when he said he redid the private dining room. Was he, boss?
What do you want, Carlo? Can't you see I'm trying to fucking eat my dinner here, huh?
I came in to tell you Paulie's here. Wants to drop off this week's envelope. You want to talk with him, or you want me to take it and send him on his way?
The fucking balls on this kid, Maron. My boys in the force sold his rat ass right up the sewer. Send the bastard in here, but stand by so you can escort him out after.
I'll take him through the kitchen so nobody sees.
Enzo, I didn't mean to interrupt your meal. Christ knows how much you love your antipasta.
You know nobody come between me and my gabagool. Now, stop breaking my fucking balls and sit down. You hungry? I can have Vinny bring you some pasta. Best in all North Jersey.
No, Enzo. I just had dinner at my mother's.
How's your mother doing? I ain't seen her in a few months. I should swing by there and check in on her.
You know, Enzo, she's never really been the same since my father passed away. She don't play cards with the neighborhood girls or nothing anymore.
Can't be easy on her losing your father. One of the best men this family's ever seen. God rest his soul. You know what's special about your father, Paulie?
What was, Enzo? Oh, Jesus.
Settle down. Don't jump like that. See, a cork pop like that would have never scared you, old man. Your father was fearless. More importantly, though, your father had honor. The thoughts of riches and fame never crossed his mind. All he cared about was the family, your mother, and you. You could trust him with anything. You wanted a secret kept? Your father was fucking Fort Knox. Never once would it cross his mind to betray the people who cared about him.
Wow. No, you got the wrong idea, Enzo. I ain't done nothing. I would never cross you, I swears it.
See? Something else about your father that made him special. He was a good fucking liar, unlike his prick son.
Enzo, I'm telling you, you got the wrong guy. I would never.
Don't make things worse. We're just going on a walk. You know, talk this out.
Get this fucking rat out of my face so I can finish my dinner.
Hi, welcome to Gate Crashers, a podcast dedicated to kicking open the door to your next favorite thing. Our mission, our creed, our code is this: to make all nerdy things more approachable and accessible to everyone. We want you to find a universe that you'll fall in love with. My name is Maya. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm a business and television student from New York City, and I run Sopranos Out of Context. That's at OOC Sopranos on Twitter.
And I'm Dan. I use he, him, his pronouns. And you know me. Maya, I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
I've been following your Twitter back once all the pandemic and all that stuff started, I got laid off. So the first thing I did was watch the entirety of The Sopranos.
It's a good way to start being laid off.
Yeah. And I had never seen it before. Like I honestly had avoided spoilers except the ending, because if you didn't know the ending, it was pretty hard to avoid.
Right.
Until then. So I got to experience the show at a very interesting time as an adult, so I could finally really appreciate it. Where did you, what made you get into the show?
Yeah, that's really interesting that you're saying that you watched it for the first time during the pandemic, because something that I've noticed running the account is that I'm getting a lot more DMs and I guess people in my mentions telling me they watched for the first time, or they're quarantined with someone who's watching for the first time. So I think it's interesting that you watched it just so recently.
I grew up in a very Italian household. My stepfather and his whole family are very, very Italian, like spaghetti Sundays and stuff like that. And I've always been around Italian Americans like my entire life, like very close friends. mentors and things like that. And literally every single one of them told me to watch The Sopranos. But I honestly don't think I was, you don't have to be mature to watch a show, but like, I don't think I would have taken away what I took away if I watched it earlier in my life.
Yeah, for sure. And something definitely that I've noticed is that like younger people, particularly younger men, they kind of miss the point of the show. And well, there's like multiple points and there's not like one solid point, but they kind of get caught up in like the crime and the gumars and the smoking and the beating people up and all that jazz. But yeah, I started Sopranos for the first time when I was a freshman in high school. Around that time, I had gotten really into like mob media and like it just seemed like something, it just was interesting to me. And I hadn't seen Godfather, hadn't seen Goodfellas or anything like that. I grew up in a house with a mom and a grandma who both really liked TV. And I always heard from just other people that I needed to watch The Sopranos. And two of my teachers, my freshman year of high school, they didn't know. They spoiled it for me by accident. And I started it that year. I bought a couple of the first episodes on iTunes, really, really loved it. Tried to watch it on third-party sites because buying an episode of Sopranos on iTunes every other week was just not sustainable. That got really difficult keeping up with the third-party sites because it's not as seamless as streaming on like Netflix or Hulu or something where you can just pick up right where you left off, and it got really tedious. Then my senior year, I was messing around on Amazon, and my family has Amazon Prime, and I noticed that Sopranos from start to finish was included in Amazon Prime Video with HBO Now. So I was able to watch it seamlessly from start to finish, which was really lovely. And I just loved it so much. Didn't really have anyone around me to talk about it with because like my friends were like, oh, isn't that so old? My parents used to watch that. And I was born the year that it came out. Fast forward to February 2018. It's my freshman year of college. I hurt my knee and I wasn't able to go to school or work for 2 weeks. And I was super sad. And I decided to start watching Sopranos again. And I was like, man, the show is really funny. Like, is there a Sopranos out of context account on Twitter? And there wasn't one. So I started it.
Got in there when the getting was good. That's so interesting that you saw it without seeing The Godfather and like those other, like the big mafia media, like the Italian American, like the pinnacles.
Right.
Because the show references them a lot, but not in the way you expect it to. Like it holds it up to this higher standard. Like everyone loves it, but like they often misquote it and things like that. And I just think that's a fun part of the show. So a little bit about the show for anyone who doesn't know about The Sopranos. The Sopranos is a television drama created by David Chase. It premiered on HBO in January 1999. The show follows Tony Soprano, a New Jersey mob boss, played by the late and great James Gandolfini, as he manages his personal life, his mob life, and clinical anxiety and depression. In the pilot episode, Tony begins seeing his psychiatrist, Dr. Jennifer Melfi, after a series of panic attacks. And we, the viewers, get to witness him process the events of his life and have breakthroughs about why Tony Soprano is Tony Soprano. So David Chase, but there was not just David Chase, there were some other writers. Like, didn't Matthew Weiner get his start on this show?
Yes, Matthew Weiner joined Sopranos. I also really like Mad Men. Mad Men's my favorite show, so I know a lot about Mad Men and Matthew Weiner. But Matthew Weiner started on on Sopranos. Yeah, I learned that too fairly recently. But yeah, he started on Sopranos more towards the end. I think the 5th and 6th season. But he was on there, and if you watch Mad Men, you can see parallels between Tony and Don and just the way things play out in Sopranos and the way they do on Mad Men.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because I'll go so far to say Sopranos changed television because like before it was like this, you got these perfect images of fathers and like families and like the hero police and all that kind of stuff. And Sopranos wasn't that at all. Like Sopranos was showing you this deeply broken human and like the environment he's living in.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I totally agree.
And so I'm so excited to have you because you're the expert on this, not I.
Thank you.
Do you want to give like a little bit of background on how it came to be and everything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So David Chase, the creator of The Sopranos, he'd been a television producer for 20 years, and he'd always been really fascinated with the mafia and organized crime since he was younger. He initially wrote Sopranos as a film about a mobster who's in therapy. He's having issues with his mom. And after receiving some feedback from his manager, David Chase decided he was going to write it as a television series instead. And he and Sopranos producer Brad Gray, they pitched the show to several different networks. I think Fox was interested, but then they turned it down. And then Chris Albrecht, who was the president of programming at HBO in the 90s, decided to finance the show. They filmed one pilot episode in 1997, and they put the show on hold, which made David Chase made him antsy. And he initially was going to ask them to finance it as a film so he could just get it over with. And then in December of 1997, HBO decided they were going to produce the show, and they ordered 12 more episodes so that it would be a 13 episode long season. And like you were saying before, The Sopranos is considered one of the greatest television shows of all time for several reasons. Its unique approach to dramatic television paved the way for its more modern successors, I would say, such as Mad Men, Breaking Bad, BoJack Horseman, Sex and the City even. It made people take television more seriously as a medium, and it definitely changed things for HBO, because before Sopranos, people just saw HBO as the place where you go watch boxing on pay-per-view. And it also changed the way that dramatic television is written and produced, because each individual episode of The Sopranos kind of feels like a 1 hour long movie from start to finish. And that's something that's very prevalent in the first season. And Tony Soprano is one of the first television anti-heroes, and he helped change the narrative that television protagonists are supposed to be these squeaky clean, good, likable people. And it's also just an incredibly written show loaded with lots of themes and symbolism.
Now looking at HBO, like Lovecraft Country, Watchmen, all those shows they've done recently, and Watchmen, like HBO is just like one of those channels where you're like, oh, that's where good television just comes from. But before that, as you said, it was just the boxing channel. It's extremely cool thinking about how Sopranos pretty much changed the whole medium, and just kind of paved the way for everything that we have now. Wow, the 1 hour drama, the fact it's pretty much everything now. Disney has them. There's the million streaming services, but just the fact that this is what did it.
Yeah, exactly.
And you did mention how it's the whole show is loaded with themes and symbolism. Some of the biggest ones in it are the American dream, one's life purpose, the psychology of everything, the lives we choose versus the lives we were born into. It deals a lot with mental illness, toxic masculinity, and family. And who would you suggest this show to?
As a television student and a television fanatic, I'm of the belief that any television show can be for anyone. If you're open to trying something new, I think that you can find something to take away from everything that you watch. Sopranos is in what I call the holy trinity of white male anti-heroes, the other being Breaking Bad and Mad Men, because when we talk about dramatic television, we often hear about those three, and they do have that thing in common. So if you enjoyed either of those, you'll definitely like it. Love that. If you're someone who's really into writing or literature, or you even enjoy watching television very critically like I do, you'll like it. There's just a lot of material there and a lot to be said about all of it in the show. And if you also like shows and movies from the 90s and the early 2000s, you'll really like it. I was born the same year that Sopranos came out, a couple months after. And my older siblings were born in 1989 and 1990, respectively. So something about just 90s and early 2000s shows and movies feels very cozy and very nostalgic and familiar. And that's definitely a feeling that you get in Sopranos for sure. It feels like, yep, that's the 90s right there.
Yeah. And so I was 92, but getting to grow up around it, my parents watched it. Everyone was watching The Sopranos. So growing up in that environment, I was like, oh, this show is an adult show. I'm not allowed to watch this. But now that I'm a big adult, I get to watch these adult programs. And so It's actually available a lot more accessibly now with HBO Max and Hulu. If you have a subscription to premium Hulu, you can also buy the seasons on Amazon Prime Video and iTunes, and then you could probably get the physical copies anywhere you buy DVDs and Blu-rays.
Exactly.
So before we go to our discussion, I meant to ask you something at the top of the episode. We've started to transition to have more guest co-hosts and things like that on the show. but when we do interviews, we always ask all of our guests a very hard-hitting question. And I have to ask you as well. What is your favorite sandwich?
Okay. I'm from New York City, so I have to say it is a bacon, egg, and cheese with salt and pepper on a toasted everything bagel. But my personal answer, as me, Maya, is the chicken thigh sandwich on ciabatta from the now defunct Soho restaurant called Delicatessen. Rest in peace, Delicatessen. It's a chicken thigh sandwich on ciabatta bread with pesto. And it was just so incredible. And it came with truffle fries all the time. And the restaurant closed down. And I'm still pretty sad about it. But those are my answers. Yes.
Huh. Yeah, I'm a big pesto kind of guy. I love pesto. I mean, not over red, but like a chicken. Oh, man. That does sound delicious. And I'm very sorry for your loss. So we are going to break here. Go check out the first episode of Sopranos, and we will be chatting about it after it. We will be chatting about the series as a whole, so if you want to avoid spoilers, I would suggest going to check it out. Can't say enough good things about The Sopranos. It's a very unique experience. The pilot is... So I know you mentioned in the first part that the pilot was recorded in 97. Was that the same one that we see in the series?
Yes. And people often note that it just looks so different from the rest of the series. And it's because it was filmed so far in advance. And one of the ways that you can tell that is because Meadow in the first episode just looks so young. And then by the end of the season, she's like a whole teenager. And same with AJ, or similar with AJ. But yeah, it's that's it. That's the one that was filmed in 97.
So the reason I guess I wasn't paying attention the first time just because I'd never seen it, but the deli or the butcher shop where they all hang out, that's a different butcher shop because it's on a corner where the other one is set in the middle of a block.
Yes.
Huh. And you know what? I never would have known that unless you told me. I would have just accepted it as is. Like, oh, maybe it was just a different place. So tell me about your feelings about the pilot, just because I know you probably have a lot more insightful feelings than I do.
One of my things is that I just think the first season of any show is just there's just something about it that feels just very new and fresh. And the later seasons don't often replicate that just because in American writing rooms on television shows, people come and they leave. Whereas in other places, like I know in the UK, a show might be written by 2 or 3 people, and it might be shorter rather than an entire writer's room, and then it goes on for many years, like here in America. But the pilot episode, I've probably seen it 100 times. It was the first one that I bought on iTunes, and I just loved it. So I would watch it all of the time. There's so many good lines in there, and we get to meet everyone pretty quickly. Yeah, which is nice.
It astounded me that like pretty much every character in the first episode is pretty much a character through the whole series. It's not like anyone really drops off. I mean, they drop, but like very differently.
Yeah, for sure.
So seeing like every character that I knew and I grew to love or hate, depending on the character through the series, I'm not used to that in television just because throughout series you get a lot of new main cast members, and Sopranos really like you have the group don't.
It's their starting lineup.
Yeah, and other characters come and go, but they never become a part of the main cast. Like they never really, other than Tony's sister. I'm blanking on her name.
Janice.
Yeah, Janice. Janice comes in. Was it season 2? She comes in.
I believe so.
Yeah, and then she's there off and on for a bit, but she's like the only character who really gets added to the main circle.
Yeah.
You're
also something. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Something else that I really enjoy about the pilot is that it's when Tony we see him have his first panic attack, and in explaining his life and his lifestyle to Melfi, that's how we get the exposition of the show, which I think is very creative.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. You know what? Yes. I'm going to turn my camera on because I feel like with the show, I'm going to be talking. Oh, I don't have my camera plugged in. Never mind. I can't because I'm talking with my hands so much.
Right.
I think the relationship between Melfi and Tony is probably the most interesting in television. And I think we'll get into that a lot later on. But you mentioned a lot of good lines in the first episode. And I think one of the lines that like sets up the entire series is when Tony says something along the lines of, it's good to be in something from the ground floor, but I feel I've got this feeling that I came in at the end. And like that sets up pretty much, you could run that line through the entire series and it just makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Because when
it explains his feelings.
Yeah, because when the show starts, the organized crime kind of way of life is ending. Like it doesn't fit into the modern world.
Exactly. And it's not the same as it was in like back when Tony's dad and there was that same group of guys was running things.
And Tony's dad's going to be the main character in, I'm going to say the name wrong, is it The Many Saints of Newark?
Yes, that's the name. I believe his dad is the main character. I'm not 100% sure, actually.
I feel like they haven't told us much about the movie.
Childhood.
Mm-hmm. I think it's so interesting that he is coming in at this time, and he's pretty much the boss the whole time. And just seeing that he's dealing with this in like a modern world that he isn't used to is so interesting. Another one of the lines in the first episode is when he says he's into waste management, which is a very typical thing to say that you're in the mob.
Yeah.
So without coming in with all of these mob tropes and like the mafia tropes and things like that, how did you feel about the first episode as a whole, like about the premise?
I thought it was really interesting. And all I knew about The Sopranos going in is that it was about the mob. James Gandolfini had died. Like that was pretty much all that I knew. And now that we're talking about it, I think it's so interesting that because other mafia classics like Goodfellas and The Godfather, they're very, very much about the mob. And that's not to say Sopranos is not about the mob, but rather it's about the ending of mob culture, which is like, I don't think we've ever seen that depicted before.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that the show is that it subverts those tropes.
Yes.
That it's not giving you what you expect. And have you seen those movies since?
I haven't, just because they're still not really accessible to me. Like I wouldn't know if somebody asked me right now where to watch The Godfather or Goodfellas. I honestly wouldn't know. I know that Godfather comes on TV on Christmas and Thanksgiving, but that's pretty much it.
Oh, so you still have not seen The Godfather or anything like that?
No.
It's kind of awesome. I'll be honest. Like, my girlfriend had never seen The Godfather, and I was watching The Sopranos like nonstop. So we watched it together, and she was like, "Wow, that is not what I expected." I would suggest it, but like honestly, I think Sopranos is better. And I feel like someone's going to come after me for that, but it is. It's just like I think let's talk about the role of masculinity in Sopranos, because spoiler, it's super toxic. And all of these people are looking up to these movies as like their ideas of what they should be, like the strong, silent types and things like that. What are your feelings on the masculinity through The Sopranos?
I think it's so interesting, and it kind of goes back to something I mentioned earlier, which is that younger guys kind of watch shows like Sopranos and Mad Men, and they want to be Tony Soprano and they want to be Don Draper. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, did we watch the same show? Because they're not good people. Like that's the point. Like Tony Soprano cheats on his wife all the time, and he definitely called his daughter's boyfriend like 18 racial slurs in one episode. And he's a criminal, but they ignore that part because it's like, oh, like he has all this money and he has all these women and he drives a nice car. And same thing with Mad Men and Don Draper. Like they see this attractive guy who works in Manhattan and he's a creative director at an advertising firm. And I'm like, that man is not a good man. Yeah. You really don't want to be him. And that's the point of the show. And in Sopranos specifically, because I could talk about Mad Men all day, but that's the wrong show. Sopranos specifically, it's so interesting just how many rules there are for men. And I feel like that's not unlike real life. Like in season 1, where it's a whole big thing that Uncle June likes to give head, and they're like, oh well, if you go down there, if you eat pussy, you'll eat anything, and it's like, what? Like,
Yeah, where's that jump happen? Because that's like a big point of a couple episodes. That
yeah,
it just like the idea that they can't do these things because it tarnishes their identity. It's someone who has dealt with all this their whole life and like is like moving out of that like those ideas because it's super harmful. It's so interesting to hear the stuff about Don Draper and Tony Soprano because like people do love them and like they want to be them, but like they're not really taking in that like Tony kills people. Like that's his job.
right. Literally kills people.
Yeah, and not like he's not just like once or twice doing it. He's doing it a lot and like brutally, constantly. And I think there's a lot of connections you could make with Tony and Don, especially because like at the end of the day, they're both just sad. Like they're very, very sad, broken people because of what they've done and the identities they've tried to build for themselves.
Yep. And they have issues with their moms.
Yeah.
And women.
Yes. Oh, very much so. I often will say that the Hershey speech in Mad Men is one of my favorite television moments because it like takes this this character you've come like in the idea that you come to love them and like they're the coolest and they're like what a guy should be, and then he breaks down, like he loses it and he tells the board of Hershey about growing up in a brothel, and it's just like oh
right, they were his Melfi if you think about it.
Oh dang, that wow, I did not think about that. I feel like Peggy sits in that chair too because Peggy is his like maybe his moral center, but like they project on these women and like it's just it is a very interesting concept because you know what happens in real life constantly.
Yeah, you'd have to tell me.
Yeah. It's not even just
Tony definitely projects on the women in his life for sure.
Oh yeah, he had a girlfriend who was I want to say a BMW salesperson.
Yes, Gloria Trillo. She's my favorite of his Gumars, and she's just so stylish. And something that I admired about her is that of his Gumars, like I feel like the ones prior to her, they were a little bit more submissive, like Irina.
Yes,
and she like had her own life, and Tony kind of just added to her life in a way, even if their relationship wasn't necessarily super healthy.
I think the whole like her not really putting up with his shit as much is such an interesting dynamic because we've seen so many women in his life just kind of give into his one, but like Carmela doesn't, and Carmela will get into as well because I think she's a fantastically acted and written throughout the series. But yeah, I think the role of like what a man should be is like a super pinnacle point of the series. And I think one of the other series, like the big stories is with Paulie Walnuts and finding out his mother isn't his mother. And that completely destroying his life. Like from that point, you see him going home alone. I feel like you see him in such a different light at that point, and you're like, oh, he's not happy either.
Yep.
And I feel like through the series, you always see him like, hey, like as this like fun side character, but he's not. He's broken. Like it's.
Yeah. Even I don't remember what episode number it was, but I did watch it fairly recently because I was screen capping in order. And it's after Pyomai dies in the fire, and Tony didn't want the paint to give him and Pyomai anymore. So Tony goes over to Paulie's house, and his house is just very sad looking. Like, you know, those tweets that make fun of boys for not having any furniture in their apartments? That's what his house looked like. And he had the painting of Pyomai and Tony just hanging in his living room. It was so funny, but it's also like, damn, like he really like this is really his life, and like Tony is such a big part of his life.
Yeah, he like. I don't know if I would think of Tony as his son or his reason to keep going. Because is it after this point that he turns Tony into a general or something like that with the painting, that he gets someone to redo it?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
That idea that he is this person above him, like he is, he's never going to be above Tony. I love that painting. I would love to own that painting to put in my house just because it is hilarious.
Which is so good.
Yeah. Is there any other like big storylines that deal with them trying to struggle with their masculinity that stick out to you?
I guess, well, going back to the Uncle June thing, I think that whole thing, and even to have that be a thing in the first season is so interesting. But then also in making fun of him, like there's a scene where Tony and Carmela, they're like making fun of him, they're calling names or whatever, and it's pretty funny. But then even Carmela's like, well, you go down on me once a year on my birthday. And it's like, wow. So like you guys are making fun of him for the thing that you guys do. And also you only go down on your wife once a year on her birthday. Like, is that the type of dynamic that we have here? But then also later on when we find out that Vito Spatafore is gay and Meadow's boyfriend catches him going down on a guy in a car, and they catch him at the gay club. And the fact they literally murked him because he was gay is just so wild. Because like, not that I expected them to be like super accepting and progressive, but I feel like that's one of those things they could have overlooked.
Yeah, that one sticks out a lot to me because I'm watching it in 2020 and it's like, holy, like this wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
Like this group was going to, I mean, they did, like, didn't they event who killed him? Was it, I
don't remember exactly.
Because they drove up to his house, don't they? They drive up to his house and they shoot him in the driveway.
Yeah, I'm going to Google it real quick just because it's going to bother me if I don't know.
It's going to bother me too. But the idea that like he had to escape, he had to go hide in, I think it was like Maine or something, and to be himself. Like he's done so much for this group. He's the one who like has killed people for Tony. And the fact that him being gay is enough to make them want to kill him was like, whoa. Yeah. Like, and I think you mentioned it earlier where Meadow's boyfriend, Tony, just like rattles off slurs, and it's like, holy shit. Like this is how this person like fit, like Tony, that's how he is. Like that's what he was raised as. And that's how, I think that's where a lot of the modern world versus like the tradition comes up, because like they could get away with that. Like that was the world they were in.
Yeah. Okay. I just looked it up. So Vito was killed by Phil Leotardo and two other people, and they duct taped Vito's mouth shut and beat him to death. And I guess trigger warning for sexual assault. They sodomized him with a pool stick cue because he was gay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's real dark. Oh man. Like there's a lot of, I know you wrote notes about this, the race, misogyny, xenophobia, and sexuality comes up throughout the series. Did you want to talk about that a little bit just so we can?
Yeah, for sure. So racism, I am Black and I am a woman. And a lot of my experience as a Black woman I have to do with misogynoir, which is very specifically misogyny that I face because I'm a Black woman. And very interestingly, I have not caught misogynoir in The Sopranos. And that's because there are no Black women in The Sopranos. And the only two that I can think of are from season 1. And one of them, she's Hesh's girlfriend, and she's laying in bed with him one night while Tony's on the phone with him because they're beefing with the Hasidic Jewish guys, and Hesh is Jewish. So Tony calls him for advice. And then the second one is Livia's Trinidadian nursing aide who quits after one day. I'm pretty sure Livia called her a slur because we see her storming out the house. Carmela pulls up to the house and the aide is coming out and she's very angry and she's like, I'm quitting, blah, blah, blah. I'm pretty sure Livia called her a slur. And watching The Sopranos as a 14-year-old Black girl was very interesting because, you know, even though I grew up in New York City, I grew up around lots of Italian people, you know, you kind of stumble upon Italian words you never heard before. So one day I was watching an episode and I heard the word "dit soon," And I was like, oh, I wonder what this Italian word means. And I found out that it's a slur for Black people, and they have a lot of those. So that was interesting. And the whole storyline with Tony and Noah, Meadow's boyfriend, who is Black and Jewish. I think it's so crazy that he was so upset about Noah being Black and dating his daughter that he saw Uncle Ben on the box of Uncle Ben's rights and had a panic attack about it. I feel like it was never that serious. But yeah, it's just, and I do browse Reddit from time to time. I'm not in the Sopranos subreddit specifically, just because I don't like to be in there. But I there are times where I've Googled race in the Sopranos or sexuality in the Sopranos and stuff like that. And I get taken back to threads in that subreddit where people are like, oh, well, when it comes to race, they kind of hate everyone, which is true. They speak negatively about pretty much anyone who isn't Italian and or white. Mm-hmm. But there is definitely anti-Blackness specifically in there. In terms of misogyny, I think it's very interesting that the women on the show, and I think Janice references this, and I'm pretty sure I read this in an article in school before, but they kind of fall into two categories, because there are the women who are they're there solely for sexual gratification. And then that would be the Gumars. That would be the Gumars and the girls at the Bing. And then there are the women who they're treated with respect because of their relationship to the men in the Sopranos crime family. So that's Carmela, Meadow, Janice, maybe, even though Janice is kind of in their social group and they kind of clown her all the time. So that's really interesting. And it's definitely a little bit harder to watch now, because you kind of see these people who, while they don't necessarily look like me, it's wow, this woman got beaten up because she was defending herself against Ralph Cifaretto, and she just was a stripper who wanted to be loved and things like that. And sexuality, we were talking about them considering a guy eating pussy being gay, and Vito literally getting murked because he was gay. So it's definitely interesting to watch now, especially now that we know the things that we know now, and the public conversation around all these topics is changing. But I also think it's a good jumping off point for conversations and being hey, this is how things used to be, or
yeah.
Thank you for that. I didn't want to personally speak on that just because I haven't had to deal with it a ton in my life. But the misogyny, when you mentioned Carmela, she was praised pretty much the entire show until she went again, when she was doing something they didn't like, and then she gets killed.
Yeah.
The only people who get treated well are themselves. They don't treat each other well. It's a very fine line. It's sick. It's just sick. But
yeah. Wait, you said Carmela, or did you mean Adriana?
Oh, not Carmela. Adriana, that's what I meant.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Sorry. Carmela makes it. Yeah, but Adriana, the whole series, people love her. Everyone's friendly with her, and then people who've been really friendly with Sil. He's the one who kills her.
Yeah, and it I think that ties back to the idea that these women are respected because of their relationship to the other. They're oh, it's not, she's Adriana and she's a person with feelings and thoughts and interests and things, but rather that this is Adriana and she's Christopher's girlfriend, so we have to respect her because she's Christopher's girlfriend.
Yes, it's the kind of objectification of anyone who isn't them.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it comes up in Tony's animals. It's something that I think about, is his attachment to these ducks and his attachment to this horse. And when they talk about the dog that Christopher accidentally killed, these animals are something that he can control, that they will not leave him because he can control them. They don't have free will of their own, essentially. They do, in a way, right, that they're living and sentient, but he makes the choices for them, and they do not speak back.
Yeah, I was just gonna say they can't voice their opinions or anything to him. So
I was thinking, oh, that's so cute that he loves these ducks, but it's also He just likes them because he can control it and they won't leave him. And when they do leave him, he starts having panic attacks. And
and I think he likes the idea of feeling needed in a more softer context, because he's needed in like the family or whatever, but that's very business oriented and it's like people's livelihoods are on the line. Whereas with the animals, he can be like softer and caring for them, and he knows that he doesn't really have anything to lose there.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the panic attacks come up in the first episode, and it's a major plot point throughout the series, and Tony's mental illness in general. How did you think the series handled his mental illness in general?
I think they did a really good job of depicting mental illness, because we watch him have a lot of highs and lows, and we see that he goes through a period where he can't even get out of bed in the morning, which is very realistic. And I think it's interesting how the panic attacks, as we learn more about Tony, we go through more of the show, we learn that he'd been having panic attacks for a while, and they were really connected to his mom. Like in, I think it's season 4, when Tony B, played by Steve Buscemi, comes back from prison, and we learn in a session with Melfi that Tony was also supposed to be there the night that Tony B was arrested, or he got caught or whatever. And the thing that they were doing, I think they were doing a hit or something like that, or they were stealing something. And that went off incorrectly because Tony wasn't there. He lied and said that he got beat up by some black guys or something. But what really happened is that he had went over to his mom's house, and she was giving him grief about Carmela not calling her or something, but they had just had Menno, so she was very busy, and he had a panic attack, so he missed the thing. And he still was holding on to grief about that, which I think was really interesting.
I wanted to get into Tony's mother a bit. I wrote a note, but I forgot about it. I think Tony's mother, she died in season 2, right, in real life. Like the actress passed,
yes.
Right? Because she probably would have been a pinnacle point of the series throughout if she had been alive. The way she is I don't want to say she's a funny character, because she makes you laugh, because the things she says are like, oh my God, like something along the lines of, oh Lord, just take me now. But you have to think about the fact that she has lived in this life for almost her entire life. And it's a lot to handle. You can see the effects on Carmela from the beginning of the show to the end of the show, and like how she has changed. But imagine that for Tony's entire life. So her dealing with the stuff is not healthy. One specific thing that in the first episode it stuck with me is when Tony comes in, she goes, oh, do you want some eggplant parm? I made it last night. And he's like, no, Ma, I already ate lunch. And she still goes into the kitchen, gets out the eggplant parm, puts it on a plate, and brings it out. And he goes, Ma, I told you I already ate. And that is such an Italian thing. Like my grandmother does the same thing. Mm-hmm. Like as soon as you walk into the house, have you eaten? Do you want to eat? Doesn't matter. You're still going to eat. I think it's just one of those things. It's like, that's probably what was expected of her. And it's sad to see that. And like her going to the home and losing her autonomy and things like that. I think she was a great character. What were your thoughts? Sorry, I went off on a tangent there.
Oh, no, you're good. Something that I'm thinking about now that you brought it up is that, she had to deal with the mob and mob life it was very much a big part of her entire being. And I can kind of understand why she kind of just wants to, get out of here. But not only was she a mob wife, but she was a mob wife in like the 50s and 60s in North Jersey. And something that they reference in the show a lot is that North Jersey wasn't always in super good shape, and especially back when Tony was growing up. So I'm wondering, because at least Carmela, we see her in the first season, she like starts trading stocks, and she has more modern life, and she has the ability to go and do more things. Like she goes and tries to build that spec house and stuff and get into real estate. And she very much has her own hobbies and things, and like she's able to do things. But I'm wondering if, in addition to feeling like suffocated by the mob life, she also felt suffocated by like oppression and misogyny. Tony's mom being a woman and a housewife in like the 1950s and 60s.
Oh, I would go so far as to say most likely, especially with knowing how Tony's father was growing up. Like Tony describing him as this kind of terrible dude. But by the end of his life, he was like, what did he say? He was just a nub of a man, like he was worn down. But Tony puts that aggression towards his mother instead of his father. It's her fault that he was like that. And I think that's him reflecting that he's going to be like that too, because he is doing this to himself. And I think a major thing about Tony is that Tony is never to blame. Tony is,
It's always someone else.
Yeah, he can barely even say that he's depressed. Like him saying he has depression is like a really hard thing for him to do. So before we get into one of the characters I really want to get into, who was like the character you followed the closest throughout the series? I don't want to say favorite because it's kind of hard to have a favorite out of this motley crew.
Right. I really like Carmela and Meadow. I think I just aligned myself with Meadow because when I started the show, I was a teenager and she was the only other teenage girl on the show. I also think her relationship with Tony does kind of remind me of my relationship with my dad because like I'm like the young progressive daughter who just wants there to be peace in the world, and my dad's kind of just a very old school guy. But ultimately, like with Meadow and Tony, like Tony would do absolutely anything for Meadow, and Meadow does love Tony, even though they don't see eye to eye on lots of things. And he does cause her a decent amount of grief with like her boyfriends and stuff. And like, that's kind of similar to like me and my dad. Like, I know that my dad would do anything for me and I do love him very much, even though we're fundamentally different in a lot of ways. I also think Carmela is she's just so underrated and underappreciated because she has amazing outfits. She always turns a look, that's for sure. And she's just a very interesting woman. And it's very interesting to watch her juggle being Catholic and being a mom and being a wife to a mob boss and her own morality and things. And my favorite thing to point out between Meadow and Carmela is that fundamentally they have the same issue, which is that they are involved in this life and they want to be good people despite being involved in the life. But the fundamental difference there is that Carmela knew what she was getting into when she got together with Tony. Meadow didn't ask to be born, let alone to be born into a mob family. So I think it's very interesting to see their dynamics play out because it does often feel like Meadow is Carmela, but younger. And she has to deal with the burden of not even having a say in the life that they live, whereas Carmela knows what she got into.
Yeah, and I don't say she's a willing passenger, but she like end of the day, she does love Tony very deeply. Mm-hmm. And he does everything he can to mess that up. I did want to get into Christopher next, but I do think we should talk about Carmela more because I did just watch Whitecaps.
Yes.
And Whitecaps, tell me if I'm wrong, they both won Emmys for that, right?
Yes, I'm pretty sure they both won. I know for sure Edie Falco won because I just Googled her this morning.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure Tony won. James Gandolfini won also.
That everyone talks about the fourth season, like it's super uneventful, like not as much happens, but watching their marriage fall apart in real time.
Oh yeah. Wow.
The fight they have, it's just like, it didn't feel like television. It felt like real life, like watching two people just go at each other, but not in a structured way that you expect in television. Like this is point A, point B, point C. She brings up Furio, and then Tony just is like, all you do is bitch and bitch and bitch. And it's like, but two different wavelengths here. Like
like
what did you think?
Also, I don't know if you
go ahead.
I don't know if you saw Marriage Story, but with Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson, the argument scene from that movie went pretty viral. And I actually like that movie. I've seen it a couple times and I was watching it pretty recently and I was like, there's kind of a lot of parallels between their argument scene in Marriage Story and the one in Whitecaps and Sopranos. And I'm wondering if Noah Baumbach, he like drew anything from there, if he was inspired by it perhaps. But I want to hear what you have to say also.
I had not. I watched some of Marriage Story. I never got to finish it. That's the scene where Adam Driver punches a hole in the wall, right?
Yes.
Okay. I think that came out around the time Star Wars came out, so it was kind of hard for me to watch anything with him in it because I was still mad. But the whole scene is just like, it's very contained. It's them two. Tony, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think Tony ever raises it. Does he raise his hand to Carmela at all? Like, I don't know if he ever hurts her.
I don't think so. I think that might have been the first time. I could be wrong though.
Because I know he has hurt other women, which is just, but like this whole scene is just like, he doesn't have anything that she did wrong. Like he's saying that she wanted to be this princess and things like that, but like that's what he wanted for her. That's, Tony. Like he would want her to be in the best clothes, to be in the best house, because that's a reflection of him. Like
exactly.
Carmela just wanted to be loved. She wanted to be loved. And I think that is a theme across pretty much every character in the show, is that, and I mean, it's so human in general that we just all want to be cared about and appreciated. And Carmela doesn't get that.
I agree.
Like, imagine having to put up with Tony Soprano. Like me, I will be honest, and from time to time I do eat gabagool out of my fridge, out of the package. I'm more of a prosciutto kind of guy, but some gabagool every once in a while. I'm not collapsing when I eat it, but having to deal like being afraid every day that the person you love is going to die. That does something.
And it's kind of not worth it when you think about it, because while Tony he provides for her and Meadow and AJ very well, and he's always like, you guys are going to be taken care of no matter what happens, he doesn't really love her the way that she needs to be loved. And it's kind of not worth the stress for her if you think about it, besides like the financial stability.
Yeah, having money and things like that is cool, but like at the end of the day, you just want someone to like do things with and be happy with and like be a good father. Like there's scenes where Tony is a good father, where he's like, there's that one that you always see the picture of where Tony's playing Nintendo 64 with AJ, like, but he's playing it like a dad, like he's like a
weirdo.
Yeah,
he can't hold it correctly.
Like he's never seen a controller before. Like there's scenes like that, but then there's also scenes where he's like, I think he pins AJ up against the wall at one point when he's living by himself. Like he is rough. And it's just not. Yeah. Monetary value doesn't replace love.
Of course. I agree 100%.
We've also done a really good job about not focusing on Tony, which I'm very excited about.
Me too.
Because a lot of the conversations that I see and hear and read are about Tony. And
there's other people on the show.
Yeah. Like, mind you, James Gandolfini, one of the best performances of all time. I do have one quote that I do want to bring up from him, which is that I find I have to be this sad clown laughing on the outside and crying on the inside. And it's like, I'm just so glad you went to therapy. Do we ever find out who made him go to therapy, or he did it himself?
I think he had his panic attacks, and I feel like Dr. Cusimano recommended some therapists for him, and he gave him a few, and he chose Melfi because she was the only Italian one.
Huh. All right. Well, before we get into Christopher, let's talk about Melfi. I will let you take that away because.
Yeah, for sure. I absolutely love Lorraine Bracco as Jennifer Melfi. I think she's so wonderful, and she really tries with Tony, and their relationship is very complicated. It's definitely not very professional, but it's very complicated because she wants him to get better, and he acts like he doesn't care about therapy. But if you watch enough of the show, you know that like he really does value his therapeutic relationship with her. Like I know it's some episode in the first season, and I think they're at a barbecue, and he had just come from therapy before this scene, and he's saying to the guys, he's like, you know what I'm learning recently? Talking helps. And I was like, oh, he likes therapy. Like that's so good for him. And then when he's trying to convince his mom to go into the nursing home, and Dr. Melfi is like, oh, it's like a hotel at Captain Teebs. I know seniors who are inspired. And then he goes and repeats those exact same sentiments to his mom later in the episode. So he really does value her and appreciate her. And I think their relationship is so interesting. One of my favorite episodes actually is Pax Soprano, which is season 1, episode 6. And Tony, they're in a therapy session, and Dr. Melfi's like, okay, so what do your mom, your daughter, and your mother all have in common? And he's like, they all break my balls. And she laughs, and he has a dream about her. And then he realizes or convinces himself that he's in love with her, and he tells her, and she's not receptive. And she's like, you aren't in love with me. We are making a lot of progress here. You've made me all the things that you feel are missing in your wife and in your mom. And I was like, wow, like she really cleared him in the 6th episode. And it was true. And I think that's also just I think relationship psychology is really interesting. And I think it's so interesting that he associated like being listened to and having somebody process his feelings with him and give him feedback on it, as well as Jennifer Melfi being a very beautiful woman, and put those pieces together and was like, I am in love with her.
Yeah, that sounds like Tony. I like Sexuality character, like the dynamic just between actors is like incredible. There's so many times where they're sitting in silence for maybe more than normal on like television. Like there's significant beats of nothingness, of them staring at each other. And like you can read that room. You don't need the words to be there because they have that connection. And content warning for Employee of the Month, there's sexual assault, and Dr. Melfi is assaulted. And after that, they're sitting in therapy, and the dynamic has completely flipped. Tony comes in, and he's very receptive. He's very, I want to say positive, because he's like, oh, I'm making all these strides. I'm doing all this stuff. Like, you're really helping me. I feel like I am in control. Like, he feels that he is not unbalanced for once. And Dr. Melfi isn't. She went through something completely traumatic and horrific. And she doesn't have her glasses on. I think that's a very important thing, because she always has her glasses and she doesn't have the glasses. And like, that is like the true face that she has at the moment. She's like, it's a very, very, very rough episode, but she starts crying, and Tony is like, whoa, is this something I said? And like, he had an inflection in his voice that he normally doesn't have. Like, he's usually a little bit sarcastic or like, Tony, but he goes over and he like puts his arm around her and he's like rubbing her back. Like, he is being kind out of being kind. Like, he deeply cares for Dr. Melfi, and she knows that she literally could say what happened and the man would be killed.
Exactly.
And she doesn't.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that you bring up the dynamic being flipped between them, because the way their relationship is that he has his problems and he brings them to Dr. Melfi, and they kind of talk through them together, even though he's not always receptive. And then a therapeutic relationship, as someone who is in therapy, it's not exactly reciprocal. It's not 100% reciprocal. Like, my therapist can't come talk to me about stuff because I'm 21 and I don't have a degree. But it's just so interesting that she had this major thing happen to her, and it's not like she can go talk to him about it. And she doesn't even tell him what happened, which is, about keeping boundaries between like therapists and clients and things. And also, like, I've been the person that somebody or people come to, like, when they need help or they like need someone to be objective and they need good feedback. And recently I've had the experience where I was the person who was in a really rough place, and like, I didn't feel like I had anyone to talk to, but it was hard to be like, I'm the one that's supposed to be not to quote Tony, but like, I'm supposed to be the strong, silent type. I'm supposed to have it together, and I don't have it together right now. So who am I supposed to go to? I think that's something that I took away, and that people who are like me can probably relate to.
Yeah, I feel I went to school for psychology. I don't use it, or I never followed up with a graduate or anything. But like seeing these dynamics and the fact that this show in 1999, right, was talking about mental illness, had a character going to therapy, when even today, it's still stigmatized, like therapy is stigmatized, but back then it was even worse. Like,
yeah, for sure. Especially if you're a man.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like talking about your feelings isn't masculine. And like Tony was doing it the whole series. It wasn't like something that just stopped. I think that was a very powerful story element, but like also a very, I hope it got some of these young guys who were like, oh yeah, Tony's awesome, to go to therapy. That would, a good amount of them could use
such
it.
An impact. Yeah. Or even like the very baseline of thinking, I feel this. Why do I feel this? And how can I fix it? Because unfortunately, just the way that our society is structured, even that is a skill that people are lacking. Like emotional intelligence is very hard to come by in people.
Yeah. And like taking a self-inventory isn't easy if you don't know how.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I with all of that, I do want to get into Christopher a little bit, just because
yes, for sure.
For me, that was a character that he was so fascinating to me from day one. And even in the first episode, you see that he isn't appreciated, and he feels that. Like at the end of the episode, Tony gives him shit because he's like, "Oh, you never even thanked me for this big contract that I got us." How did you feel about Christopher and his journey through the series?
I was actually telling someone the other day, now that I've restarted the show, because I'm posting scenes from the show starting from the very, very beginning. So I'm on like episode 4 right now. I think I'm developing like a newfound appreciation for Christopher because, number one, incredible eyebrows, young Michael Imperioli, so cute, love him. Always has a cute outfit on. We love to see it. But also, if you think about it, because like Silvio, Paulie are old, and Tony is not as old as them, but also old. And Christopher is he's like a whippersnapper. Like he's the youngest one in the joint. And his job, like, is he basically hangs out with these old people all day. And like he, Brendan Filone gets killed right away. Like that was his bro, but he got killed pretty quickly. Adriana, you don't want to hang out with your girlfriend all the time. Like he really hangs out with old people all day. And sometimes old people just don't get it.
Yeah.
And just like one of the themes you mentioned was like having a life's purpose. He and Paulie have that scene where he's trying to write his script and Paulie comes over and he's like, a character goes through an arc and like, what's my arc? And I'm like, as a 20 something that hit me. Like what, damn, what is my arc? And I think that that's something lots of people can relate to. And just, his journey of moving up the ranks in the mob family is also very interesting because I don't think he does it because it's something he really wants to do. I think that he doesn't really feel like he can do anything else. Like he kind of feels like Tony in the way that he's like, well, this is my life now, I guess. Like I can't like go back to school and get a degree.
I totally follow that. I think a lot of him, even when he does try to do other stuff, he's so invalidated. Like people will shut him down. I mean, he did get to hang out
all
with
the time.
A young Jon Favreau before he made Chef, one of the best films. But it's like all he wanted was to do something more and to be something more than just Tony's. He's kind of like his son or like his little brother. Mm-hmm. That's the dynamic that always stuck out to me. But he's like, he tries so hard always to impress Tony, and he doesn't give him that. He never gets that valid. And major spoiler, Tony kills him.
Yeah.
I had no idea about that going in. My father, like, he was a huge fan, and I texted him throughout the series, like, "Oh, I love these characters. Like Christopher, I really hope he gets his stuff straightened out." And like one time, I texted him about Christopher, and I was like, "Oh, I really like this character. Like, I really hope he like finds his," because he had a family, he moved, like he was living in the suburbs.
Yeah.
And I was texting him. I was like, I'm so excited that he's getting his stuff together. And he goes, what episode are you on? And I was like, oh, Plottabot. He goes, all right, text me after this one. I was like, you son of a bitch. Oh my God.
It's so funny.
I never saw it coming. Not in a million years.
Yeah, it's just so sad because he was really like, I don't remember how he felt after Adriana got killed, truthfully. That was a while ago since I saw that season, whatever. But he really was like finally happy. Like he was sober. He had a wife or girlfriend. They had a baby. They were barbecuing at his house for once. And he really got out in his prime. And Tony had to be the one to kill him, which is very sad. But I think he killed him because like he messed something up and he just wanted to like skip the embarrassment of something. I could be wrong.
Yeah,
but
it was like,
it's so interesting.
And I feel the same way you do, that he was born into this and like he doesn't have anything else. Like he never seems like he really wants to do this. He just wants to feel successful.
Right.
And just breaks. I think the biggest scene with him that sticks out for me was always the intervention, where like everyone's like trying to be nice, and then Adriana says that he can't perform in bed, and then all the gloves are off. Everyone is going to destroy Christopher. Literally, she
really opened the floodgates for that. It was so funny.
Because fucking Paulie goes,
and like the fact that she said it in front of all of them, it's like, bro, like these guys are all kind of like Christopher's dad. Like, you could have talked about this with him later.
Yeah, but then, like, as soon as that happens, then Paulie gets and he's like, you're weak. You're a loser. Just go take your medicine. And it's like, Paulie, you idiot, shut up. And then they kick the shit out of him. Because he gets mouthy. But then him and Syl start just beating the crap out of him on the ground. They're kicking him. And it's just like, happy intervention, I guess. Like, that's really going to do some good. Yeah.
It kind of ties back to the masculinity thing because
once one of them is challenged, so they're like, well, I don't know if wolves do this, but like, if someone's weak, they like take them out. I don't want to talk shit about wolves. Don't get me wrong, but like, they're just like dumb men. There you go. That's easier. I'm not going to tarnish wolves. It's just like dumb men who it's like, oh, you said something mean about me when I'm trying to help you. I'm going to kick your ass. It's just like, this is why so many of you die.
Right, and also that definitely did not stop him from doing drugs.
No, not at all.
Like,
I loved Christopher. I really did. I think he was one of those characters I was rooting for, because I don't think he was bad, but he wasn't bad to the core like I think Tony is. I think I didn't think he was too far gone. So it sucks that like. The thing that hurt me even more was Adriana. Like, I loved her.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. That was rough.
Do you think she knew? I was rewatching that episode and I was wondering, like, did she know that that's what that was? Because, like, I feel like there were inklings of, like, hints right before that happened. Like, I think she spoke to the FBI agent and then Syl was picking her up and then she did start crying in the car. So, what do you think? I'm curious.
Yeah, because she does cry. I think she knew. Because, like, when did Syl and her interact before that? When was Syl ever? Why wouldn't they send? I don't remember what Carmela was doing at the time. Why wouldn't someone like Carmela or someone she's like closer with? Especially because, like, there was that like 30-second thing with Tony. Like, I think she knew, and it was still so hard to watch because, like, as the viewer. You're hoping, and you're like, I hope they're taking her. I think he was in the hospital, maybe, or he was somewhere that they were taking him. Oh, they said Christopher was in the hospital, but it's just like you hoped they weren't going to do it because she was a staple from the beginning of the series. And I don't think Christopher ever came back from that, in my opinion. Like, he had a new wife.
Yeah,
and stuff. I think that was the person he was always going to love. That whole thing. So away from the actual story of it, I know you are a TV fanatic and that's what you're studying. So how do you feel about how the Sopranos used things like dream sequences and things that normally don't fit into the tropes of mob media to show struggles and things like that?
I think they do a fantastic job. I don't have a lot of mob media to compare it to, but as far as the things that they use in the show, I think they're just done so well. And I think it has to do a lot with David Chase worked in television for very many years. And he often cited Arthur Miller and Tennessee Williams as inspiration. So I can see that a lot. Huh. And often dream sequences in shows are often very corny. And that's not even me being a television student. I think that's the general consensus among TV watchers, that dream sequences in shows are very rarely dull. Mm-hmm. And I think Sopranos just does such an interesting job with it.
I fully agree. I think my brain is still cycling on the Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller because that makes so much sense. Like, don't quote me, but Death of the Salesman sort of feels like a story like this person who's just not well, and they end up in their own demise. And I think that's a lot of, it's like you could call it like the Gatsby or things like that, the American tragedy, that there's these deeply broken men who want nothing more than to be successful, with the idea that they want to do it for their families and for the people they love. But at the end of the day, they're doing it for them. Yeah. Is there any other big points you wanted to chat about?
I'm going to take a look at these notes. I guess we touched on this earlier, but like the idea of the anti-hero, and something that I've been thinking about, and I actually initially had this thought when I started watching Sopranos for the first time, my senior year of high school, is that like before Sopranos, really, I don't think, and I could be wrong because I was not alive then, there weren't really, television wasn't super serious as a medium. Like we got so many sitcoms and so many reality shows and things like that. And then Sopranos hit the pavement and we got so many afterwards, and it really changed the media landscape for sure. And I really like the idea that the protagonist of a show is not supposed to be, or just isn't necessarily somebody who's likable, because human beings we are dynamic people. And, I don't think anyone is all good or all bad, and our reflections are good or bad, rather. And I just think that we really do owe it to David Chase and The Sopranos and Tony Soprano for why we have so many good shows now with characters who aren't necessarily likable. And I think that's an interesting way to lead a show, because human beings aren't perfect and we do make mistakes, and I think offering that perspective from a protagonist point of view is very important as well, because media does play such a big role in shaping people's lives and experiences of things.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it did change. It changed everything. The fact that there were so many police procedurals and all of that kind of junk. And then there's this show that comes along that things aren't clean. Things are messy and life is messy, and you're not the good guy at the end of the day sometimes. Like, it's not that easy. And they 100% created this anti-hero thing that, you had Scarface and The Godfather, but you didn't have them every week. You had them in theaters for 3 months, but Tony was in your house every Sunday for years. And then you had Don. And I think Walt is next. But I think all of these, as you said, the Holy Trinity of these broken, misguided men, like, because even Walt thinks he's doing it for his family. He's not. And eventually he admits it. He's building an empire. Like, he's doing it for him, because he was never successful. He never got what he wanted, and he's getting it now. And so you've got Tony and Christopher, you've got Don and Peggy, and then you've got Walt and Jesse. I never thought about each of them has their own sidekick. Not sidekick, but like, you know what I mean? They're these characters who kind of want to emulate the person, but then they realize how broken they are and they try to figure out their own thing. Some get away. Christopher did not. Peggy 100% did. One of my favorite shots in the show is when she's carrying her box of stuff out.
Yes.
Jesse got away, but like, Did he? Did he really? Because like
I actually haven't seen Breaking Bad, but I do know enough about. I know enough about it to know like what their relationship was like.
It's a good one. It's a lot.
Mhm.
It's worth what I think it's worth watching if you like these shows.
Mhm.
It may be overhyped, as most things can become after years of fandom. But yeah, I really do think Sopranos is 100% a show worth watching.
I agree.
And thank you for coming on. So where can people find
Thank you for having me.
Find you online? Like, where do you want them to find you?
Yes, my Sopranos Out of Context Twitter is at OOC Sopranos on Twitter. My email address is the same thing, oocsopranos@gmail.com. Serious inquiries only. And yeah.
Well, thank you. You can find us at GateCrashersPod on Twitter and Instagram. I think by this point we will have a website. Yeah, thank you for coming on. Oh, I did have
Thank you for having me.
I had one final question.
Yes, of course.
How did you feel about the Sopranos finale?
I'm of the opinion